3 weeks passed at the academy, and Kira learned more about the galaxy than she had ever imagined possible. And she also learned that being the only human in a sea of aliens was lonelier than she had expected. She ate her meals alone in the corner of the massive dining hall. And she studied alone in her tiny room, and she trained alone whenever the other cadets paired off for practice. Nobody wanted to be her partner, and nobody wanted to be her friend. And she told herself that this was fine because she was here to learn and not to make friends, but the loneliness still hurt in ways she did not want to admit. The other cadets came from worlds with lower gravity and gentler climates and safer environments, and they found the training difficult and exhausting in ways that Kira did not. When they ran long distances, she kept pace with them easily because her lungs were built for an atmosphere that would poison most of them. And when they lifted heavy weights, she matched their strength because her muscles had grown dense under Earth's crushing gravity. The instructors began to notice her endurance during the second week when the cadets were forced to run through a simulation of extreme heat. And one by one, the aliens collapsed from exhaustion while Kira kept moving forward. "How are you still standing?" gasped a Gorvathy cadet who had fallen to his knees beside her. And his gray skin was covered in sweat, and his eyes were wide with disbelief. "I grew up in a place called Arizona," Kira said as she helped him to his feet. "And this feels like a nice spring day to me." The Gorvathy stared at her like she had grown a second head. And then he stumbled away without another word. Instructor Van Rai watched these moments with his ancient compound eyes, and he began to keep records of the human's performance that he did not share with anyone else. He noticed how she moved through the training grounds with a constant awareness of her surroundings, and how her eyes tracked every movement in the room even when she seemed to be focused on something else. He noticed how her muscles never fully relaxed, and how she always positioned herself with her back to a wall when she sat down, and how she flinched at sudden sounds before anyone else even heard them. These were not trained behaviors, Van Rai realized, but instincts that had been carved into her species over countless generations of survival on a world that was always trying to kill them. He found himself wondering what humans were truly capable of when pushed to their limits. Torvax also watched Kira during these weeks, but his eyes held only contempt and growing frustration. He had expected the human to fail quickly and wash out of the program in disgrace, but instead she was matching the other cadets in almost every test, and her strange endurance was making him look bad by comparison. Was a Valnorian noble from one of the most respected warrior families in the coalition, and his people had been conquering worlds while humans were still living in caves. And the idea that this small, soft creature could stand among them as an equal made his blood boil, so he decided to remind her of her place. It started small with accidents that were not really accidents. Kira would find her equipment missing before training sessions, and she would discover that her food had been tampered with in ways that made it inedible. She would discover that her food had been tampered with in ways that made it inedible. And she would arrive at her quarters to find crude messages scratched into her door. She knew who was responsible because Torvax made no effort to hide his hatred, and his followers among the other Valnorian cadets laughed openly whenever something went wrong for her. But Kira did not complain, and she did not fight back. And she simply worked around each obstacle with quiet determination. When her equipment went missing, she borrowed from the supply closet. And when her food was ruined, she skipped meals and trained on an empty stomach. And when she found messages on her door, she cleaned them off without a word. This restraint confused Torvax because on his world, such disrespect would demand immediate challenge and violent response. And a warrior who did not defend their honor was no warrior at all. He took her silence as proof that humans were cowards. who lacked the courage to stand up for themselves. And this made him bolder in his cruelty one day during combat training. He positioned himself behind Kira and swept her legs out from under her while the instructor was looking away. And she crashed hard onto the training mat with a sound that made several cadets wince. Kira lay there for a moment with the wind knocked out of her lungs. And she looked up to see Torvax standing over her with a cruel smile on his scaled face. "Clumsy little Deathworlder," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Perhaps you should go back to your primitive planet where you belong." Kira said nothing as she climbed back to her feet. And she brushed the dust from her uniform and returned to her position in line. And she did not give him the satisfaction of seeing her anger. But Torvax saw something else in her eyes, something cold and dark and patient. And for just a moment, he felt a chill run down his spine. He dismissed the feeling as imagination and walked away laughing with his friends. That night, Kira sat alone in her quarters and stared out the window at the distant stars. And she thought about everything General Chun had told her before she left Earth. She thought about how she was representing all of humanity and how she needed to be better than the hatred directed at her. And she thought about how much was riding on her success, but she also thought about the look on Torvax's face when he stood over her. And she thought about all the times he had tried to break her spirit. And she thought about what would happen if he pushed her too far on Earth. She had trained in dojos and gyms and military facilities since she was old enough to walk. And she had learned how to fight and how to hurt and how to break bones with her bare hands. She had learned these things because Earth was a dangerous place where the weak did not survive. And because her body had been shaped by millions of years of evolution to be the perfect survival machine, the aliens did not understand this because they had never faced a human who had stopped being polite. Kira hoped they would never have to learn. But something told her that hope was running out. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. And somewhere in the station, Torvax was planning his next move without any idea of what he was truly dealing with. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth was called a death world. The shuttle doors opened with a soft hiss, and Kira Vasquez stepped onto the metal floor of Volantis, prime for the first time in her life. And maybe the first time for any human ever. She carried one bag over her shoulder and wore the gray uniform of a new cadet. And her boots made sharp sounds against the polished station floor as she walked forward into the massive arrival hall. Hundreds of alien beings moved around her in every direction. And none of them looked anything like her. And most of them did not even glance her way as they hurried to their own destinations, but some of them stopped and stared. A group of tall creatures with shimmering blue scales watched her pass by, and their forearms crossed over their chests in what looked like disapproval. And their yellow eyes followed her every step. Kira kept her face calm and her eyes forward, and she did not react to their stares because she had been warned about this moment many times before she left Earth. "You will be the first," General Chun had told her back on Earth. "And that means you will be judged for all of us. So keep your head down and your fists unclenched. And show them that humans can play nice with others." She remembered his words now as she walked through the crowd of aliens who towered over her small frame. And she reminded herself that she was here to learn and to represent her species and not to cause any problems. The Galactic Coalition Military Academy was the most respected combat training facility in the known galaxy. And beings from dozens of worlds came here to learn the arts of war and defense. And now a human had been invited to join them for the first time. Kira found the registration desk at the far end of the hall. And the creature behind the counter was an insectoid being with large compound eyes and clicking mandibles that made sounds she could barely understand. "Human," the creature said, and its voice came through a translator device that hung around its neck. "You are the one called Kira Vasquez, yes?" "Yes," Kira replied, and she kept her voice steady and polite. "I am here to begin my training." The insectoid made a series of clicking sounds that might have been laughter or might have been something else entirely. And then it handed her a datapad with her room assignment and class schedule. "Your quarters are in Section 7, the creature said, "and your orientation begins tomorrow at first light, so do not be late." Deathworlder. Kira paused at that word because she had heard it before in briefings, but never spoken directly to her face. And she knew what it meant even if she did not fully understand why it mattered so much to these aliens. Earth was classified as a Class 7, Deathworld in the Coalition's planetary registry, and this meant that her home was considered one of the most dangerous and hostile environments in the known galaxy. The gravity was too strong, and the atmosphere was filled with reactive oxygen, and the surface was covered with predators and parasites and poisonous plants. And somehow humans had not only survived there, but had thrived and spread across the entire planet. To the aliens of the Coalition, this made humans something strange and frightening, like monsters from a nightmare who had somehow learned to wear clothes and speak politely. But Kira did not feel like a monster as she walked through the gleaming halls of the station toward her quarters. And she did not feel dangerous or frightening at all. She felt small and alone and very far from home. Her room was tiny but clean, with a bed that was slightly too short for her legs and a window that looked out into the endless black of space. And she sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long breath. Tomorrow, she would begin training alongside warriors from races that had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. And she would have to prove that humans deserved a place among them. She did not sleep well that night. The next morning came too quickly, and Kira made her way to the main training hall where dozens of cadets had already gathered in neat rows. She took her place at the back and tried not to draw attention to herself. But she could feel eyes on her from every direction, and she could hear whispers in languages she did not understand. The instructor entered the room, and every cadet fell silent at once. He was a Kyrix, one of the insectoid species that Kira had read about in her briefings. And he was ancient and scarred, and his compound eyes seemed to see everything at once. "I am Instructor Venrai," he said, and his voice was cold and sharp like the edge of a blade. "And I have trained warriors for longer than most of your species have existed. So you will listen to me, and you will obey me, and you will learn or you will fail." His eyes swept across the room and stopped on Kira for just a moment, and she felt her heart beat faster under his gaze. "We have a new species among us this cycle," Venrai continued. "A human from the Deathworld called Earth. And I expect you all to treat her with the same respect you would show any other cadet. No more and no less." A sound came from somewhere in the front rows, something like a snort of disgust. And Kira saw the blue-scaled alien from the arrival hall standing there with his forearms folded. "Instructor," the alien said, and his voice was smooth and arrogant. "Surely you cannot expect us to train alongside such a creature, as her species has barely learned to leave their own planet, and they have nothing to teach warriors of true blood." Venrai's head turned slowly toward the speaker, and his mandibles clicked in a way that sounded dangerous. "Cadet Torvax," the instructor said, "I do not remember asking for your opinion on this matter. So you will keep your mouth closed unless you wish to run laps until your legs fall off." Torvax fell silent, but his yellow eyes burned with anger. And when he looked back at Kira, there was pure hatred in his gaze. She met his stare without flinching, because she had faced bullies before, and she knew that looking away would only make things worse. The training began, and Kira threw herself into every exercise with everything she had. And she ran when they told her to run, and she climbed when they told her to climb, and she fought when they told her to fight. She was not the strongest or the fastest or the most skilled, but she never stopped, and she never complained, and she never gave up. No matter how much her muscles screamed, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew that Torvax was watching her and waiting for her to fail. But Kira Vasquez had grown up on a Deathworld, and she had never learned how to quit. The morning of the sparring demonstration arrived with no warning of what was about to happen, and Kira woke up feeling the same tired ache in her bones that she had felt every day since arriving. At the academy, she dressed in her training uniform and made her way to the main combat hall where the other cadets were already gathering, and she took her usual place at the back of the group where she could watch without being watched. Instructor Venrai stood at the center of the hall with his ancient body held straight and his compound eyes scanning the assembled cadets. And beside him was a large circular mat where the demonstrations would take place. Today, we practice grappling techniques, Venrai announced, and his voice echoed through the silent hall. And you will work in pairs to demonstrate controlled submissions. So the rules are simple, and I expect you to follow them without exception. He held up one of his segmented limbs and counted off the rules. First, no strikes of any kind, and second, you tap to yield when caught in a hold, and third, you release immediately when your opponent taps. And any cadet who violates these rules will answer to me directly. The cadets nodded their understanding and began to pair off with partners. And Kira looked around for someone who might be willing to work with her, but before she could find anyone, a voice rang out across the hall. Instructor, Torvax called, and he stepped forward with his forearms spread wide and his yellow eyes gleaming. I would like to volunteer to demonstrate proper technique for the class, and I request the human as my partner. A murmur ran through the crowd of cadets, and Kira felt her stomach tighten because she knew exactly what Torvax was planning. He wanted to humiliate her in front of everyone, to show the entire academy that humans were weak and pathetic and did not deserve to train alongside real warriors. Venri's compound eyes shifted between Torvax and Kira, and for a long moment he said nothing. Very well, the instructor finally said. Cadet Vasquez, please join Cadet Torvax on the mat. Kira walked forward through the crowd of watching aliens, and she kept her face blank and her breathing steady. And she stepped onto the mat to face the Valnoyan who had made her life miserable for weeks. Torvax towered over her by nearly 2 feet, and his scaled body was covered in hard muscle. And his forearms gave him twice as many options for grabbing and holding as any human. He smiled down at her with teeth that were sharp and white. Try not to cry when I put you on the ground, little Deathworlder, he whispered so quietly that only she could hear, because I want everyone to see what your species truly is. Kira said nothing in response and simply settled into a ready stance with her knees bent and her hands raised. The other cadets formed a circle around the mat to watch, and many of them were already whispering about how quickly the human would fall. And some of them were making bets on how many seconds she would last. Venrai raised one limb to signal the start of the match begin. He said Torvax did not wait. He lunged forward with shocking speed for a creature of his size, and his upper right arm shot out like a striking serpent to grab Kira's left wrist, and his clawed fingers locked around her forearm with crushing force. His grip was like iron, and his scales were rough against her skin, and he began to pull her toward him to set up whatever painful hold he had planned. Got you, he hissed with triumph in his voice. Now let us see how long you last before you beg me to stop. The crowd of cadets leaned forward to watch the human's defeat, and some of them were already laughing at how easily Torvax had caught her instructor. Venrai observed with his compound eyes that could process 200 images per second, and he waited to see how the human would respond to being trapped by a stronger opponent. Kira looked down at the clawed hand wrapped around her wrist, and she felt the pressure of his grip grinding against her bones. And something shifted behind her eyes. For weeks, she had endured his cruelty without fighting back. And for weeks, she had swallowed her anger and reminded herself that she was representing humanity. And for weeks, she had been polite and patient and peaceful. But now he was touching her. Now he was hurting her. Now he was threatening her, and something deep inside Kira Vasquez. Something old and primal and forged in the fires of a Deathworld. Woke up, time seemed to slow down around her as her body took over from her mind. And millions of years of evolution and thousands of hours of training merged into a single clear purpose. Torvax saw her expression change, and he felt a sudden cold fear in his chest. But before he could understand what was happening, it was already too late. Kira did not pull away from his grip like he expected. Instead, she stepped forward into him with explosive speed, and her free hand came up to clamp over his gripping arm just above the elbow. And her entire body rotated with violent force. She used his own rigid grip as a lever, and she drove all of her weight and momentum through the joint of his elbow. And her technique was perfect, and brutal and faster than thought. The sound that followed would haunt the nightmares of every cadet who heard it. It was a wet, crunching snap that echoed through the silent hall like a gunshot. And it was the sound of bone and cartilage giving way under forces they were never designed to handle. Torvax's arm bent in a direction that arm should never bend. And the scream that tore from his throat was not the cry of a proud warrior, but the howl of an animal in agony. He released her wrist instantly and collapsed to the mat, clutching his shattered limb. And his yellow eyes were wide with shock and pain and disbelief. Kira stood over him with her chest rising and falling in steady breaths. And there was no rage on her face and no satisfaction and no fear. There was only the cold calm of a predator who had done exactly what predators do. The entire hall was frozen in stunned silence. No one moved and no one spoke and no one could quite believe what they had just witnessed, because it had happened so fast that most of them had not even seen it. Instructor Van Rai stood motionless with his compound eyes fixed on the human. And for the first time in his long career, he had failed to react in time to stop an injury. He had been watching carefully, and his eyes could see faster than almost any creature alive. And yet she had moved so quickly that the damage was done before he could even think about intervening. The human looked up from Torvax's writhing body and met the instructor's gaze. "He grabbed me," she said in a quiet voice that carried across the silent hall. "And on Earth, that is a threat." Van Rai finally understood something that the Coalition had never truly grasped about humans. They were not soft. They were not weak. They were not harmless creatures from a Peters from a primitive world who had gotten lucky enough to reach the stars. They were survivors of a death world. And death worlds did not produce survivors by being gentle. The screaming continued as medical drones rushed into the training hall. And Torvax writhed on the mat, clutching his ruined arm while his followers stood frozen in shock. Around him, Kira had not moved from where she stood, and her eyes tracked the movement of everyone in the room with that constant awareness that Van Rai had noticed weeks ago. Other cadets had backed away from her, like she was a dangerous animal that might attack at any moment. And perhaps they were right to be afraid. Van Rai approached her slowly with his hands visible and his movements careful. And he stopped at the edge of the mat with his compound eyes studying her face. "Cadet Vasquez," he said in a calm voice. "The match is over, so please step off the mat." Kira blinked and some of the cold focus faded from her expression. And she looked down at Torvax like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "Yes, instructor," she said. And her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that might have been regret. She stepped off the mat and stood at attention while the medical drones loaded Torvax onto a stretcher. And his screams had faded to whimpers as pain medications flooded his system. One of his Valnorian friends stepped forward with rage burning in his yellow eyes. "She should be arrested," he shouted, and his forearms were clenched into fists at his sides. "She attacked a superior cadet and nearly killed him, and this cannot be allowed to stand." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, but Venrai raised one segmented limb for silence. I saw what happened, the instructor said. And his voice was cold and sharp. And Cadet Torvax grabbed Cadet Vasquez in a manner that could be interpreted as aggressive. So her response was within the bounds of self-defense. Self-defense. The Valnorian spat. He was demonstrating a grappling technique as you ordered. And she broke his arm like it was nothing. Venrai turned his ancient eyes toward the angry cadet, and something in his gaze made the young Valnorian step back. I have been training warriors for 300 years. Venrai said quietly, and in all that time I have never seen anyone move as fast as this human just moved. So I will be the one to determine what happened here and not you. The Valnorian opened his mouth to argue, but thought better of it. And he turned away to follow the medical drones, carrying his friend out of the Halvan Rai, dismissed the rest of the cadets, and told them that training was cancelled for the remainder of the day. And they filed out in small groups while casting nervous glances at Kirasun. Only the instructor and the human remained in the vast, empty hall. Walk with me, Venra said. And he turned toward a side door. Without waiting for her response, Kira followed him through a series of corridors until they reached a small observation room with a window looking out into space. And the instructor gestured for her to sit in one of the chairs. She sat, and he remained standing. And for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Do you understand what you did today? Venrai finally asked. Kira nodded slowly. I broke his arm, she said. And I did it on purpose, and I did it faster than I should have been able to. Yes, Venrai agreed. And do you understand why that matters? Kira thought about the question before answering. Because now they know what humans can do, she said. And they are afraid. Venrai made a clicking sound that might have been approval. I have reviewed your species classification in our records many times since you arrived, he said. And I have read about your planet's gravity and atmosphere and predators. And I thought I understood what it meant for you to come from a Deathworld. He paused, and his compound eyes seemed to look at something far away. I was wrong, he continued. Because I understood the facts, but I did not understand what those facts created. And today I saw it with my own eyes. Kira remained silent and waited for him to continue. Your reaction time was measured at 0.08 seconds, Venrai said. Venra said, which is faster than any species in the coalition, except for certain ambush predators. And your technique was perfect, in a way that suggests it was not learned but instinctive. He turned to face her directly. You did not think about what you were doing, he said, because your body simply did what it was designed to do. And what your body is designed to do is survive by any means necessary. Kira felt something twist in her chest because he was right. She had not planned to break Torvax's arm, and she had not decided to hurt him. And her body had simply reacted to a perceived threat in the way that human bodies had been reacting to threats for millions of years. On Earth we call it fight or flight, she said quietly. And when someone grabs you, and you cannot run away, then you fight. And you fight to win because losing means dying. Venrai nodded his understanding. Your species evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill you, he said. And so you became killers in return. And you carry that legacy in every cell of your body. He moved to stand by the window and looked out at the stars. The Coalition has records of Deathworlds and the creatures that live on them, he said. But we have never invited one of those creatures to train alongside our warriors. And now I am beginning to understand why. Kira felt a cold fear settle in her stomach. Are you going to expel me? Shiaskedvanare was silent for a long moment. No, he finally said. Because what you did was not wrong, even if it was dangerous. And Torvax provoked you deliberately and paid the price for his arrogance. He turned back to face her. But you must understand that things will be different now, he said. Because the other cadets have seen what you are capable of. And they will either fear you or respect you or hate you even more than before. Kira nodded because she had already accepted this truth. I know, she said, and I'm sorry that it happened this way. Because I wanted to prove that humans could be trusted, and instead, I proved that we are dangerous. Venrai made another clicking sound. Perhaps those are the same thing, he said. Because a warrior who cannot be dangerous cannot be trusted to protect anything. And what you showed today was not cruelty or malice, but capability. He moved toward the door. There will be an inquiry, he said. And Torvax's family will demand punishment, but I will speak on your behalf. And I believe you will be cleared of any wrongdoing. He paused at the door and looked back at her. But Cadet Vasquez, he said, I would advise you to be very careful from now on. Because the galaxy is watching you, and they will not forget what they saw today. He left her alone in the observation room with nothing but the stars for company. Kira sat in the silence and thought about everything that had happened. And she thought about the sound of Torvax's arm breaking and the look on his face when he realized what she had done. She had not wanted this. She had come to the academy to learn and to grow and to show the galaxy that humans were worthy of respect. And instead, she had shown them something else entirely. She had shown them the truth about what humans really were, and the truth was terrifying. The inquiry took place 3 days later in a grand chamber at the heart of the academy. And Kira stood alone before a council of 7 senior officers from different coalition species. Torvax's family had sent representatives who sat in the gallery with murder in their eyes. And they had demanded that the human be expelled and imprisoned and sent back to her primitive world in disgrace. The head of the council was an ancient Gorvathi admiral with gray skin covered in old scars. And he looked down at Kira with an expression that was impossible to read. Cadet Vasquez, he said, you stand accused of excessive force during a training exercise. And the result of that force was a compound fracture of Cadet Torvax's right arm that required extensive surgical repair. Kira kept her eyes forward and her spine straight. I understand the charges, she said. The family of Cadet Torvax has requested your immediate removal from this academy, the admiral continued. And they have further requested that you be banned from all coalition military facilities permanently. A murmur ran through the gallery, and Kira felt the weight of dozens of hostile stares pressing against her back. However, the admiral said, we must first review the evidence before making any decision. He gestured to a screen that flickered to life on the wall behind him. And the recording from the training hall began to play. Kira watched herself step onto the mat and face Torvax. And she watched him lunge forward and grab her wrist. And she watched what happened next. Even knowing what was coming, she was still surprised by how fast it was. One moment Torvax had her arm, and the next moment, his arm was bent the wrong way, and he was screaming on the ground. And the transition between those two states was almost too quick to see. The council watched the recording 3 times at normal speed and then began to slow it down frame by frame. Instructor Venrai, the admiral said, please share your analysis. Venrai stepped forward and pointed to the frozen image on the screen. As you can see, he said, Cadet Torvax initiated contact by grabbing Cadet Vasquez's wrist in a manner that was clearly aggressive. And his grip was strong enough to cause bruising that was later documented by medical staff. He advanced the recording 1 frame at a time. Cadet Vasquez's response began exactly 0.03 seconds after contact was made, he continued. And her entire counter technique was completed in 0.05 seconds, which gives a total reaction time of 0.08 seconds from initial contact to the breaking of Cadet Torvax's arm. The council members leaned forward with interest. To put this in context, Venrai said, my species has compound eyes that process visual information at 200 frames per second, and I am considered one of the fastest reacting instructors in this academy. And yet I was unable to intervene before the damage was done. He turned to face the council directly. I have been training warriors for 3 centuries, he said. And I have never encountered a species capable of such explosive violence in such a short time frame. The Admiral stroked his scarred chin thoughtfully. And what is your assessment of Cadet Vasquez's actions? He asked. Venrai stood in silence for a moment before answering, I believe. She acted on pure instinct, he said. And I believe that instinct was a survival response hardwired into her species by millions of years of evolution. On a Class 7 Deathworld, he looked at Kira with something that might have been respect. Humans do not learn to be dangerous, he said, because they are born dangerous. And every cell in their bodies carries the memory of ancestors who survived by fighting and killing and refusing to die. The gallery erupted in angry protests from Torvax's family representatives. This is outrageous, one of them shouted. You are making excuses for a savage who attacked a noble warrior. And this cannot be permitted to stand. The Admiral raised one massive hand for silence. I have heard enough, he said. And I am prepared to render my decision. The chamber fell quiet and Kira felt her heart pounding in her chest. Cadet Torvax initiated physical contact in an aggressive manner. The Admiral said, and Cadet Vasquez responded with force that was proportional to the perceived threat, according to the standards of her species. And therefore, I find no grounds for disciplinary action. Shouts of outrage filled the gallery, but the Admiral ignored them. Furthermore, he continued, I am ordering a full review of the Coalition's training protocols regarding mixed species sparring, and I am recommending that humans be classified as restricted partners for contact exercises until we better understand their capabilities. He looked down at Kira with eyes that held both caution and curiosity. Cadet Vasquez, he said, you are cleared of all charges, and you may continue your training at this academy. But I strongly advise you to exercise extreme restraint in all future interactions with your fellow cadets. Kira saluted the council. I understand, she said, and I will do my best. The inquiry ended, and Kira walked out of the chamber into a corridor filled with cadets who had come to see the outcome. They parted before her like water around a stone, and none of them met her eyes. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. No one touched Kira without permission, and no one stood too close to her, and no one made jokes at her expense. And the hostility that had followed her since her arrival was replaced by something else, fear. But fear was not the only thing she saw in their eyes. Some of the cadets began approaching her cautiously to ask questions about human combat techniques, and they watched her training sessions with intense focus, and they took notes on every move she made. A young Kirix cadet named Zikri was the first to ask her directly for help. I want to learn, Zikri said, how you did what you did, because my people are scientists and scholars, and we have never been warriors. And I want to know how to protect myself. Kira considered the request for a long moment. I can teach you some things, she said. But I need you to understand that human fighting is not about honor or glory or proving yourself, because it is about survival and nothing else. Zikri nodded with understanding. That is exactly what I need, she said. Word spread, and more cadets came to learn from the Deathworlder. And Kira found herself teaching classes in the evenings after regular training ended. She taught them how to use leverage against stronger opponents and how to target weak points and how to end fights quickly before they could escalate. And she taught them the most important lesson of all: never fight unless you have to, she told them. But if you have to fight, then fight to win, because the universe does not give prizes for second place. Instructor Ven Rai observed these sessions without interfering, and he began to compile a report for Coalition High Command. The report would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. On the final page, he wrote his conclusions in simple, clear language. I have studied the human called Kira Vasquez for several months now, he wrote, and I have come to believe that we have fundamentally misunderstood her species since first contact. We saw their small bodies and their soft skin and their short history of space travel, and we assumed they were weak. He continued, but we failed to consider what kind of world could produce such creatures. They are not weak, he wrote, because they are survivors, and they are not primitive because they are patient. And they are not harmless because they have simply chosen to be gentle. I recommend immediate expansion of human recruitment into coalition military programs, he concluded, because they are the most naturally gifted warriors I have encountered in 3 centuries of service, but I also recommend extreme caution in all dealings with their species. He added, because they have been polite to us so far, but politeness is not the same as inability. Do not mistake their restraint for weakness. He wrote, and whatever you do, he finished, never ever corner one. Far away on the observation deck, Kira stood alone and looked out at the stars that humans had only recently begun to explore. She thought about her home and her people and everything they had survived to reach this moment. And she thought about the future that was waiting for them among the stars. The galaxy had learned something important about humans today. They had learned that the small, soft creatures from the Deathworld, called Earth, were not what they appeared to be, and they had learned that lesson the hard way. Kira smiled at the stars and wondered what other lessons humanity would teach the galaxy in the years to come. She had a feeling they would be memorable.